Good morning and most welcome to Heidegger 1365. We will today brush through three different authors with the communal line of the Klein bottle. I call it attention as the self going into itself. And this is self-penetration as the Klein bottle logic depicts. Here we have the famed Klein bottle, where inside becomes outside, inner becomes outer, and as we mentioned in the previous lecture, it is also the turning of clockwise to anti-clockwise, and then going to anti-clockwise again. This amazing movement that is built into reality itself. I start reading the last of Stephen M. Rosen's first part of Quantum Gravity and Taoist Cosmology. I'm referring here to 362, 63 and 64. I'm currently at page 20. First paragraph. And we had just been folding the Möbius strip to make us an open Klein bottle that accurately depicts the I Ching vehicle, if you like, of Who To. We're starting to look at the directionality that comes out of the Who To / Klein bottle. What are the broader implications of all this? In the present section, I have employed topology to relate the micro-world action described in contemporary physics to the action given in ancient China's Who To number archetype. although I have presented tangible paper models to detail the manner in which this action takes place, the action itself, in fact, cannot be realized as an objective event in physical space, because it is essentially psychophysical. And as an archetypal action, we may take it as the pre-objective antecedent from which the experience of objective physical reality first arises. This is consistent with a viewpoint expressed by von Franz. Above, I noted von Franz's comments that number archetypes like the Who-To are cosmic plans. And that the universe was organized according to numerical patterns of this kind. Considering also that the first four inner rhythms of the Who-To are physical. This is my comment, extraordinary important that they are in the world, tangible. the Kleinian generation of clockwise action in cycle 1 can be related to the creation of the objective material world. Interesting in this regard is that the first cycle of the Who-2 is seen as cumulative and expanding as time goes on. In cosmogonic terms, this can be associated with the expansion of the physical universe. Here we have the usual clockwise movement, that in which time flows forward in its natural sequence. Following time's arrow of increasing entropy associated with cosmic dilation. After the genesis of clockwise action from an initial counterclockwise orientation in the first Who-2 cycle, the momentum shifts back to counterclockwise in the second. Interpreted cosmogonically, this is the backward or retrograde cycle wherein preoccupation with a physical universe projected out there in cycle 1 is now overcome. And an inward awareness of the psyche is regained. The second 4 inner rhythms are psychic, says von Franz. But it is not that psyche is favored one-sidedly in this cycle. Instead, the psychophysical nature of the cosmos is realized in full. What had been projected as purely physical or objective is thus presently drawn back into disclose the archetypal source of said projection, a source that is itself more primordial than the splitting of matter and psyche, object and subject. My comment here, this is the arc-perception. This is Sein, not Seiendes. In drawing inward, the retrograde action of cycle 2 reverses the outthrust of the expanding universe to bring an opposite backward movement, falling up and contracting as time goes by. Smith, citing a passage from the Shuo Hua of the I Ching, put it this way: going along with time's ordinary sequence, indicates that one comes to know things in the order that they occur naturally. My comment here is we follow the inherent logic and not a transcendental, emotional, subjective one. Whereas going against the direction of time means reaching with the mind into the future against the flow, and knowing things before the stream of time has brought them to us. This is, of course, grasping. I acknowledge the speculative nature of this take on cosmic evolution. In the pages to follow, I will elaborate on my approach, clarifying it and providing further substantiation. This will involve reprising my demonstration in the self-evolving cosmos. That an effective rendering of cosmogony and the related issue of quantum gravity requires us to recognize that the Klein bottle is actually but one member of a whole family of interrelated topological structures. In bringing this topological family into play, we will engage with a corresponding family of taoist structures that goes beyond the system of trigrams. In this way, the link between modern Western cosmology and ancient Eastern cosmology will be brought into sharper focus. Quantum gravity and string theory. I open this paper by noting the lack of progress in theoretical physics toward an account that would unify the four fundamental forces of nature. We found that reconciling the quantum mechanical forces with gravitation requires a theory that can work effectively around the submicroscopic Planck length of 10 up to the minus 35 meters. Indispensable to such a theory is H hat, the quantum of action. This indivisible atom of process constitutes the core of quantum mechanics. And can be successfully employed in relatively low energy. And low magnification regimes. But dealing with it below the Planck length involves energies so tumultuous that the quantum properties of discontinuity and observed interaction can no longer be managed via probabilistic analysis. It was in the 1970s, following the progress achieved in unifying the quantum mechanical forces that work on a theory of quantum gravity, began in earnest. And this is when confrontation with the chaos of the Planck realm could no longer be avoided. The equations that would unify the four forces were now completely unable to contain the wildly fluctuating Planckian energies. as manifested by the infinite probabilities that turned up to render those equations useless. Movement toward an effective theory of quantum gravity has thus come to a standstill over the past 40 years. Commenting on the impasse, Lee Smolin notes that advances have been blocked. Despite our best efforts. And I will now go over to the next text with some yogi tea. I now go to the text of Anya Daly, began in 1359. And I will continue on page 3 of the article to lead you into her Klein bottle logic of attention as being ontology. Your mode of intention is what exists in the world. Therefore, Zayendens or beings are subjective in the deepest sense. At the same time pointing to, I do think I need some lights there, still a bit dark. Perfect. Thanks. At the same time pointing to an original foundation of knowledge, that understanding, despite our postmodern experience is actually possible. Towards the end of the last paragraph on page 3, I see recipient appropriate care recognizes that to willfully impose care on those who reject such gestures or on those whose long-term autonomy and freedom would be better served by withholding care. Would run contrary to the very telos of care, the other's well-being. At the other pole of the relation, to sacrifice one's own well-being in favor of another's well-being may appear morally worthy. But in reality can be a distortion of care. The care offered serves the ego project of the carer by inflating their sense of moral superiority. It is only when the deep interdependencies are integrated into the sense of self that the other's welfare is equal to one's own. Or an essential component are one's own self-understanding and values. Such as is often the case with parents and their children, that the gestures are what appears as self-sacrifice are appropriate and morally praiseworthy. In all expressions of skillful care, which is my comment, Sorge, the wider intersubjective social domains are also implicated, and the relation itself remains paramount. While contemporary care ethics derive from feminist theorizing and phenomenological ethics, from the aim to give philosophical significance to the interrelated concerns of the first-person perspective, the body, perception, and intersubjectivity. Both can retrospectively find points of concordance with the sentimentalist philosophers of the Scottish Enlightenment. Care ethics and phenomenological ethics are bottom-up ethics as opposed to top-down ethics dependent on universal principles of utility, duty, or virtue. They began with a particular first-person perspective. The body, situatedness, affectivity, and relationality or intersubjectivity. care ethicist Maurice Hamilton stresses that the ethical dispose the individual towards a caring orientation which is more primary than any moral theoretical deliberations. While both care ethics and phenomenological ethics have found generally positive receptions within the feminist community of scholars. Nonetheless, some criticize the focus of embodiment as missing crucial ethical considerations. That it cannot adequately take account of systemic power differences. That the body can be the basis for discrimination, and that the focus on the body overlooks socio-political dimensions. However, others argue that the particular percipient body is the essential starting point. And is able to build toward the wider concerns of the socio-political. Increasingly, care ethicists are taking the themes of care into the wider socio-political sphere. To address issues such as justice, precarity, environmental issues, human rights, and democracy. I once more bring out the folded Möbius strip with its inherental directionality, as we went through in the previous lecture, 1364. This was compared to the Hutu movement. And one going from the outer to the inner shows that in order to find out anything about the outer, the inner must constantly be projected into what is the, as Rosen called it, the atom of quantum action, H hat. I'd say this explains a lot. For instance, that the idea of something moral in contrast to something material no longer makes any sense. It becomes a piece of nonsense. And the lesser of the inner, the lesser of the outer. It is only, as Anya explained, when the self-penetration, it's self-saturated with reality, only then can an ethical gesture be fully executed. Otherwise, it will be an unfinished, unskillful action. Going back to the Heideggerian Sorge. A personal comment here. This is something that I suspected for a long time, but also others. It's rare that morality usually is stronger within the natural sciences. There's been several research projects, one in the United States, to show that scientists, especially physicists, are much more interested in those aspects that usually is or are deemed to be ethical or moral. I think once we see morality as something extra. I think that is a token for something not really being understood of the quantum action. The movement starts within itself. It goes back to itself. Anya delicately puts it, then it becomes a moral action. When you equal yourself to the one you put your charity, help towards. This goes obviously for the natural sciences. There will be no understanding of physics if this is not done. Maybe some questions from my dear colleague, if you have, or comment.
We should not forget the arche that Rosen pointed out in his paper. He says it means first, so we shouldn't forget the number, that you always start with something. The order, that is, it looks a little bit abstract perhaps on paper, south, north, east and west, but you have to start somewhere, that is from you. And then even in Möbius band or Klampatoli you begin at some point. And that is also perhaps with care, and that Anya Daly pointed out, that you start somewhere, that is from the subject. And for whom it was sentiments, that was a good point, that you can also start with sentiments. And that also Lisa, what was her name? Lisa Barrett. What was her complete name? Lisa Barrett.
Her name is Lisa.
Lisa
Feldman
Barrett.
Barrett.
Yes. So Lisa says that sentiments are essential for everything, and that complements Anya Daly's paper. Yeah, that was my chief observation for me.
Thank you very much, Kalle. Good as always. Yes, the order is this movement, the ordinal numbers. And as you see, they also give rise to the directions. But it's important to understand it is a simultaneous becoming of both directions and order. So you can put the ordinal numbers here, 1, or rather the first, the second, the third, and the fourth, as Rosen just did. So you see the ordinal numbers are here, very helpful to see that ordering and time is essentially the same, or even better, coming from an original force. In this paper, it's the H hat, quantum action. It is also the most marvelous and interesting inherent movement. That is, I would say, easiest to understand in the Möbius strip, but it becomes even stronger in the Klein bottle, where another dimension is added. I would say that is the dimension of care in the Heideggerian term, Sorge, meaning wanting to know and caring. Being a natural science is a sort of care towards others, to the humankind, opening up. I think it's Schrödinger to tell. I don't recall exactly, but he mentions without really loving people, you will not understand physics, because they are not disjunct in the arc perception where it all stems from. They are essentially the same. I will now continue with the third paper by Vaibhav, Tripathi and Pallavi, Bharadwaj. And I continue where I left off, page 9, in lecture 360. Mind wandering as modulation. We set our mind to a task at hand. Maybe reading this paper or doing some analysis, and the mind starts to drift. Some thoughts come up of the past. Some imaginations about the future. We may think about what someone said, or imagine what would one do in a situation if it shows up. We all have observed the mind wandering, but the awareness of the wandering mind comes after the mind has gone off for some time. We suddenly realize that we have not done anything or probably missed out some parts of the conversations with someone. Why TMC? Considers mind wandering as a modulation composed of the kalpa or imagination, which could be constrained or spontaneous. It is separate from smrti, which is remembrance of events, and from viparyaya, where the mind perceives and infers incorrectly. There has been recent attempts to study mind wandering, but still it is in its nascent stage. Current neuroscientific research on the mind wandering contextualize thoughts either generated spontaneously or deliberate, and with constrained focus towards a task at hand. Mind wandering is usually thought of as noise in the mind, and behaviorally estimated out of using reaction times and accuracy on task. But such experiments and studies ignore the state of mind wandering, an important aspect of the mind. when we understand that mind wandering and attention are modulations of the mind. It can help us design better behavioral experiments. Though the study of mind wandering is dispersed and there are no cohesive methods to detect when the mind wandered without probing. We believe that full neural correlates of consciousness would include both the neural correlates of attention and mind wandering. Internal states of yoga. When the mind is not in the 5 modulations or attitudes, as I also call them, it is not seeking knowledge about the world, not engaged in self-referential processing, imagination, incorrect knowledge, sleep, or memory. The mind is set to be in the state of yoga. There are further states of dharana, jnana, samadhi, and samapati. We look closely at each of these states and how YTMC can model and experimentally investigate them. Buddhist literature also mentions the state of jhanas, which are probably close or similar to the states described here as mentioned in the Yoga Sutras. But comparative studies across the two traditions are lacking. Internal states pratyahara is the process of taking the attention and the mind from the external sense objects to internal senses like proprioception and interoception, which allows the reduction of modulations and serves as a process to go into the finer, less perturbed states of meditation. And my comment here, this is the self-penetrating movement of the Möbius strip, and even more so of the Klein bottle logic. Proprioception and interoception are the internal senses that are founding for the external senses. Without apt and clear understanding from our balance organs, our sense of seeing, hearing, smelling, feeling will be off, it will be perturbed. This is what I call misuse. In this paper it is vritti. Dharana, concentration, is another internal state where through taking attention to a fixed location, the modulations of the mind are reined in. different yoga and meditation practices have used various methods for dharana, including attention to parts of body, specific locations such as chakras or ganglions, sensations of body, attention to breathing, unbroken attention to a point, repeated modern science of cognition has added fascia as the tensegral foundation for thinking and body direction. All the subsystems of the mind and consciousness are active with attention to internal or external sense organs, and the modulations begin to reduce. Attention regions are active along with amplification signals to one of the senses. Default mode activity has reduced and disconnects with the attention network. Jhana or meditation is the state achieved when the modulations have reduced, with only one content of the mind which is continuous and not changing. There is no impulse to act. The connection with the action organs is reduced. Other systems are active but the mind is coming back to a singular content. We can think of it as an attractor state of a dynamical system. The attention network is still active, but the amplification of the sensory signals have decreased. The default mode system has reduced activity and decreased connectivity within the network and with attention network. Alpha and theta power increase in deep states of meditation. And hemispheric band power synchronizes. This is alpha and theta power is the working of the right hemisphere in consort with the left hemisphere. The inner and the outer makes possible understanding of exogenous reality together with endogenous reality. We are more present. Here are some clinical examples of what happens when one or two of the modulations, the attitudes or Stimmung, gets affected somatically. Loss of cerebellum. Cerebellum has always been thought to be related to motor processing, but recent studies have started to find more involved role in cognition. researchers have argued the specific contributions of cerebellum to consciousness. A subject was found to be living healthily without the cerebellum, with only minor motor problems. Damage to the prefrontal cortex. The case of Phineas Gage has depicted the role of prefrontal cortices in behavior and self-control. As the intellect and ego network are found in the frontal regions according to YTNC, we posit that the mind of such a person would be intact, but their intellect and ego faculty would be damaged and can cause changes in personality and make the patient unable to do various cognitive tasks. Split brain patients. Corpus callosotomy, or separation of the two hemispheres of the brain, has been used as a treatment for severe cases of epilepsy. It results in very peculiar observations, like when an object is placed on the left visual field of a patient. It can detect the object, even draw the object using the left hand. But cannot say it out loud, as the left visual field is represented on the right hemisphere of the brain. Which in turn does not communicate with the left hemisphere, which is related to speech and vocalization. For such cases, using the YTMC model, we suggest that the mind subsystem would be its own self-supportive reality creator. YTMC provides us a tired model of understanding the external world, internal faculties which perceive and act upon the world. And the innermost faculty, or the seer, which is aware of the world. The concept of bringing together the modulations of the mind, along with inner states of meditation and yoga, can provide a better interpretation of various phenomena. Can machines be conscious? According to Sankhya philosophy, the world, including the action organs, sense organs, and the internal faculties, are emergent properties of the nature. As our devices become more and more complex with increasing levels of abstraction, it would be possible to create machine analogues of sense organs and motor organs. Recent advances in deep learning has allowed high-performing visual systems which can be extended to other sensory systems as well.
Put in pause.
So here many different strands of understanding seem to depict, hint to a similar structure before. First that came to mind was the Bohmian concept of what lies before implicit and explicit, something he calls hollow movement. This has been used in the connection with quantum action. We saw the third side of the triangle as the arcane perception, something that led to observer and observed. Rosen look at space itself and sees how it creates time, which is the same as order, ordinal, the movement of clockwise and anti-clockwise, but also the movement outward and inward. This is self-penetration. In the article of Tripathi and Bharadwaj, they hint to the seer, the original cause of subject and object, and it sees different modulations, and being stuck in one modulation is very close to the left hemisphere dominance, as so clearly exposed by Ian McGilchrist in The Master and His Emissary. Even more so in his latter book, The Matter with Things. The authors also point to that a precondition for understanding the outside world is proprioception and kinesthesia. Gilchrist is pointing to a loss of kinesthesia and sense of self in modern man. This could be added to the repetitious left-sided inclination for empty understanding, of not reaching inwards as well as not being able to reach outwards. The knowledge catastrophe, it has been called, when understanding becomes scarce and the little understanding we have, we recycle, rename it. This is science showing the way out. That we can reach for the true cause of things and thereby understand better what drives the world, the holy movement, if you like, or the quantum action. Daly called it Sorge, or care. That caring is the movement. Turning it to an object makes it static, unmoving, as in the subject of ethics, or thinking morality is disjunct from knowledge, the way I was taught, where even ludicrously philosophy was in one moral era, one moral sphere, and the other one a supposed material one. Ian McGilchrist is showing our way to knowledge again, to understanding lost. It is like the mission of William Blake coming to its completion, where he did not succeed. It is now finished, or at least much clearer. Maybe some questions. I hand the microphone over to my colleague.
Hello. Let me summarize in a few words the insights from these three papers. So Rosen, the 2017 paper about gravity. The key idea for me as a was perhaps the idea of archetype. So type, he goes back to the Greek word for typos, which means glow. So it becomes something active instead of the Platonic archetype that we see as something passive out there. The archetype goes forward like a blow. What else was important with the archetype? Yes, so Rosen works like a Heideggerian philosopher, goes back to the etymology. And Anya Daly takes up Hume, who want to prioritize sentiments. That's good, as Hume, although he Hume didn't know about Klein bottle, which aims at a balance between, let's say, sentiments and rationality. And then we have this last paper, Tripathi by Bharadwaj, which emphasized the seer as a keyword, that is this word. And if we can apply to quantum physics, where we speak much about observation, we don't really understand what observation is. The seer can help us eliminate that concept from an India perspective. And so the last thing, I ask you a question about Rosen's archetypes. So he wants to put it somewhere active, but what does it really mean that no active? That is what do you think, Hans, is his message about that we have to see them in a more active way? Do you want to say something?
Yeah, this was something of a revelation for me as well. In the penultimate lecture, I came to an understanding. From stillness comes activity, and that there is an original movement in what I earlier perceived as being absolutely still. And by original, it is archaic, it is the founding source. And the founding source can from one perspective be seen as still, but from another active. This is hard for us stuck in the Newtonian paradigm to grasp, but I'm getting a feel for it. And by me as scientifically inclined, adding the H hat of quantum action, which is an archetypical, archaic staticness and action at the bottom of everything, has connection to the seer. This moving is also, I found out, the thing called qi in Chinese. Also a term that is very hard to get one's finger around. Qi. In the Klein bottle, the movement superficially is easier to understand, but the Möbius strip, in its simplicity and in its inadequacy, actually lends as a starting stepping stone for understanding, for me, and I might say for others, hopefully, a better way of ascending to the Klein bottle with its more complex and intricate movement. And I'd say my personal view here, this is the original hollow movement, but that's on me.
Yes. Thank you. So I was looking, so Heidegger load participles, and to get around this old problem with archetypes, we could think about archetype using a participle. So something, and Rosen calls it a process archetype, or archetyping is a process, elemental process, and we should leave that idea of nouns that we have is ingrained in the Western culture, like Klein bottle. It's a process. So you have liquids. If you are able to put liquids here, it's a process. It's not a static thing. And that's also with the observation. The noun itself is a static. Instead, it's a movement. So here, We could also rename it while we are on that. Seeing is perhaps
definitely.
so it's a process, and so that was my.
Oh, very good, Kalle. I have not much more to say. It was gallantly. Thank you very much. Yes, there is movement, definitely. I say thank you very much. You will find links to the different articles in the description. Have a very pleasant